Hi, everyone. Thank you for joining us for this informational webinar about the case for reparations funding opportunity from Liberated Capital, which is a fund that is managed by the Decolonizing Wealth Project. My name is Edgar Villanueva. I am the founder and principal of Decolonizing Wealth and Liberated Capital. And we're really excited that you join us today to hear more about this funding opportunity to support reparations across the United States. We're going to give you just a little bit of a background about who we are and what this funding opportunity is all about. And then we invite you to ask questions. This is going to be an open Q&A session. If you would use the Q&A function on your screen, we will have those questions asked, and we will do our best to answer all of the questions that you have today. So thank you so much. Next slide, please. Put our slideshow back up. We're going to walk you through a little bit of just who we are if you're new to our community. So again, my name is Edgar. I am a member of the Lumbee tribe, and I founded Decolonizing Wealth in 2018. And our work is around envisioning a world where racial equity has become a societal norm, and new systems and ways of being ensure that everyone can live their best lives, thrive in their cultures, and bring about healing from generations of colonial trauma. And we carry out our mission through work around truth and reconciliation and healing from the global impacts of colonization through education, reparative giving, and storytelling. Next slide, please. The three focus areas of our work at Decolonizing Wealth Project are, there we are, philanthropic giving and practice. This is where our fund, Liberated Capital, comes into play with our work, and I'll tell you a little bit more about that there. We also do lots of work around racial healing in community and throughout philanthropy and other sectors, as well as work around narrative change. I'm not going to talk a lot about our work there in those latter two areas today, but we just launched a brand new website on Monday. So you can go to decolonizingwealth.com to read a lot more about our work across these areas of focus. Next slide, please. So just a little bit about Liberated Capital. This is our fund that was launched in 2019. And our fund is rooted in a framework of reparations. We fund exclusively in Black and Indigenous and other people of color communities, organizations that are also led by those communities. Just a few numbers here to share what we've been able to accomplish since we started. Of course, on the left, this is sort of some of the problem numbers that we talk about a lot, that less than 8% of funding from philanthropy goes to communities of color. And we know that the US GDP would increase by 16% by 2030 if the racial earnings gap was closed. So we are helping to, through our work in funding Liberated Capital, to close that gap. Last year, or so far, since we started in September 2019, we have had, we're a donor community. So we have 300 members of our donor community, many of those who give monthly, and we've had support from more than 1,500 one-time donors who make this work possible, as well as support from more than 20 foundations. So we pull these funds and we deploy these funds under the advisement of Black and Indigenous people to support work in communities. In 2020, we were able to raise $5 million, and we hope that by next year, we'll be at the $10 million mark. Our next slide, please. One special initiative that we did at Liberated Capital last year in response to the pandemic was to support COVID response and recovery efforts in Native American communities because of the disproportionate impact of COVID on Native communities. We saw last year we were able to launch a direct cash payments program where we provided $1.1 million in direct cash payments to more than 2,000 Native American families who were impacted by the pandemic in 5 tribal communities across the country. We also deployed over $2 million to more than 100 Native-led organizations who were providing COVID relief support, food, shelter, PPE, you name it. And then collectively in 2021, our goal is to get to $5 million in funding this year. So this special funding opportunity around reparations is a part of our overall giving, not the only thing that we will support, but absolutely a key part of our work in the year to come. We'll go to the next slide. So reparations, we're going to dive in to talk more specifically about this work, and I will also introduce colleagues who will come on to support sharing this work with you and responding to questions. But essentially, reparations from our point of view are medicine. And there's growing support across sectors to create reparations models that to address the harms that have been endured by the ancestors of enslaved people as well as indigenous communities. In our work, we introduced this idea of or at least popularized the idea of reparations and philanthropy. And we're excited to see not only philanthropic institutions begin to model reparative giving, like the Bush Foundation that we've been advising, who recently put out an announcement, I think last week, that they are moving $100 million to Black and Native communities, to individuals in the form of cash payments for various types of wealth building programs as a form of reparative giving. So we're seeing this wave across the philanthropic sector, and we're also seeing increasing support for movement building and organizing in community to see more victories and success around reparations programs at the local and regional level, and hopefully building towards a federal reparations program. So this is a key value of ours, that reparations are medicine, and the path to seeing racial healing in our country cannot happen without reparations, and reparations are long overdue. Will, I would love to invite you up to just introduce yourself, and then we'll move more specifically into this RFP opportunity.
Great, yeah, thanks for having me. Well, hi everyone, my name is Will Cordery. I am the principal of Freedom Futures and a senior advisor to Liberated Capital. And I don't know, did you want me to kind of jump right into the why reparations, or?
Yeah, let's start sort of why reparations, and then we'll dig into more specifics around the opportunity we're looking to support. Sounds good.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, so this country, the United States, was built on a history and practice of enslavement, of genocide and extraction of and from indigenous peoples and peoples of African descent. The slave trade was the first economic system in this country, the first economic commodity, the first economic extraction that led to the complete construction and build out of this country's wealth and government systems. And as a result, more than 400 years of policies and practices that fueled economic extraction and systemic violence in indigenous and Black communities has been allowed to develop and maintain itself. The conversation around reparations isn't necessarily a new conversation. We've seen it over decades of movements and different iterations. But I will say, in recent years, the conversation has taken on a new light and a new opportunity. There was an article in The Atlantic by Ta-Nehisi Coates in 2014, a thorough kind of research project on making the case for reparations and why it was important to really righting the wrongs in this country related directly to the slave trade, as well as Jim Crow, as well as current policies that keep Black folks, Indigenous folks, and other folks of color disproportionately out of systems of economic opportunity and quality of life, and what it would take to right those wrongs. Last year, U.S. Representative Sheila Jackson Lee from Texas introduced legislation that would fund the first commission to study and develop proposals for providing reparations to African Americans. It has been reintroduced this year and is gaining traction with national support. We've also seen over the last several years that local and statewide efforts are also taking hold around acknowledging the importance of reparations and putting it into action. Places like St. Paul, Minnesota, and Portland, Oregon, Providence, Rhode Island, Chicago, Burlington, Vermont, are all exploring reparations as a form of racial healing after generations of institutionalized racism. And then most recently, a lot of you have probably seen in the news that places like Evanston, Illinois, have passed policies that are aligned with reparative action and moving money back into communities. In Evanston, they're levying a tax on newly legalized marijuana that will fund projects to benefit African Americans in recognition of the enduring effects of slavery and the war on drugs. New York State just last week legalized recreational marijuana, and it came with a huge kind of plan on how that money, all the 3-point-something billion in revenue that will be generated from the sale of marijuana will go back into communities, both for trauma and treatment, but also for education and for investing in communities that have been impacted by the drug war. All with this kind of sense and value around reparations and taking reparative action for harms that have been caused. So for us at Liberated Capital, we see the impacts, we see the effectiveness of social movements in making all of these things possible in terms of new policies at local and state levels, in terms of conversations happening at the national level around reparations. And we also believe that there is a lot yet to be unearthed, which is what brings us here to this call and to this request for funding proposals, so that we at Liberated Capital can move resources out into the field to provide untethered resources to support the organizing, the advocacy to community-driven reparation efforts, and to be a platform ourselves for sharing that work out across the broader field of philanthropy. So yeah, this is a funding opportunity that aims to both kind of source the spaces and places where campaigns are taking hold, to create a platform for them, and to model new ways in which philanthropy more broadly can support reparations, organizing and advocacy. So I think I'll stop there, Edgar.
Thanks, Will. I appreciate that. If you did not join us, or maybe you're new to our work, we have held a series of conversations about making the case for reparations, 2 conversations or online events that you can check out on our YouTube channel. Just go to YouTube, search for Decolonizing Wealth Project, and you'll see one conversation with movement leaders where we talk about what is reparations and what's going on in the movement from a Black-led movement perspective, as well as an Indigenous perspective. And so that's it was a very powerful conversation that you can check out. The second conversation, we talked about the role of philanthropy in making the case for reparations, and how some funders were getting, like the Bush Foundation, payout of reparations to community as a form of repair. And so this opportunity to actually fund reparations movement building work is very exciting for us. It's sort of the culmination of work we've been working on for a couple of years now, but definitely in the last 6 months, we've been deep in conversations with various movement leaders as well as funders about what needs to happen with this window of opportunity we have before us, where folks are discussing HR 40, and we're seeing these victories across the country that Will just outlined in his presentation. So we're going to dig in a little bit deeper about specifically what the funding opportunity is. You see on your screen, decolonizingwealth.com/reparations. This is where you can find a copy of our, request for proposals. And the proposal process is very, very simple. We're using the Just Fund platform, which you can find when you go to this link here, and are trying to make this a very easy process for folks to share what they're working on. We are going to fund up to $1 million in grants to organizations. And specifically what we're looking to support is community organizing and advocacy for community-driven reparations efforts that help build the case for local, regional, and national policy opportunities, right? So we want to be very specific that we're looking for advocacy and movement building types of projects to support. We know there are many sort of models of reparations that are happening in community that are reparative types of programs, right? That are sort of modeling how, sort of shared economies and reparative types of, business practices. There's a lot of things happening around reparations. Specifically, what is a priority for us is Black and Indigenous, POC-led movement building and advocacy efforts, right, that are going to help pass policies at the local level, like we just saw in Evanston, Illinois, right, that are going to build the case for policy change that we hope will create traction toward a federal program as well. So that's one distinction of what we're looking for to support with this, these limited dollars. We hope that this will be a multi-year funding opportunity as well. We know we have enough funding to get started, but we're deeply engaged with partners across philanthropy, and we'll be committing to prioritizing our efforts through our donor community to support this work for more than 1 year. So we didn't want to wait for that. We want to get started while this is a topic where there is political will, and we're seeing this traction happening in communities right now. A couple just other things that you'll find when you look at the RFP, and Tricia, you can take the slide down, it's fine now. In terms of eligibility, again, priority, if not exclusively, going to focus on organizations and coalitions that are led by Black, Indigenous, and people of color. That is a value that we have at Liberated Capital. 100% of our funding goes to Black and Brown led work. The grant dollars must be paid to a 501c3 nonprofit organization, and we will accept applications from fiscal sponsors. We know that this is a construct of a limitation for some groups, so we will exercise all the flexibility in the world around that. If you are a grassroots coalition or a network and you don't have a fiscal sponsor, but you're doing this work, please get in touch with us. We don't want that to prevent anyone from being supported. So we will find a workaround around that. But at some point we have to figure it out, and we will. We are looking to support work in the United States. So we're looking for applicants that are based here and focus on reparations policy within our borders here. And folks may ask, what do we mean by reparations? There's a lot of discussion around that. Again, we're looking to the community to define that. Reparations may look like the payback of money for some groups. It may look like the return of land from governments or institutions for Indigenous communities. So we are not prescribing what reparations look like, but we are looking for advocacy campaigns that will shift policies and systems in a way that is returning wealth back to Black and Indigenous people. And of course, with the resources, we can't fund lobbying, but there's a lot of flexibility to fund advocacy. So that's a pretty typical kind of limitation that we just want to name. Our plans are probably to fund anywhere from 15 to 25 coalitions or organizations for funding. And we think the grant awards will average around $50,000 in the first year. And so that's sort of our estimate. It kind of depends on what comes in and we see what we have to work with, but that's our best guess at this moment in time. And then how will decisions be made? We have a group, an advisory group of Black and Indigenous leaders from across movement who know this work, who will be reviewing the materials that come in and making all of the decisions around how funds are allocated. And so we are still sort of locking in our advisory group, and we'll be publicly sharing who those folks are at a later date. So I wanted to share that. The last thing that I'll share, and then Will, if I left anything out, jump in here and we'll open this up for Q&A. If you have questions all along the way, the best way to reach us is via email at info@decolonizingwealth.com. We're a very small team, and so we don't have a lot of capacity to do a lot of phone calls. We also want to be as equitable as possible and to make sure that everyone has the same information. So any question that you have, if you would email that question to us at info@decolonizingwealth.com, we will respond to that question and we will post all questions and answers in a public Google Doc. That public Google Doc, maybe we can put a link in the chat. I think it's on the website. And so that is where all the information will be. So you can skim to see if someone else has your same question. And I'll just be honest, even as we're moving towards the Q&A session, we may not have the answer to every question. This is brand new. We are figuring this out kind of as we go. And I think as we are getting into this work with you all, a lot more will become clear. So we don't have a lot of restrictions or limitations that we want to impose on people. We just want to fund Black and brown people who are in the fight to win reparations and community. So that's essentially what we're looking to do. So there will be a recording of this session. If you missed it, well, I guess if you're here, you didn't miss it, right? But if you want to revisit the Q&A from today, if you want to share a link, go to our YouTube page, Decolonizing Wealth Project, and we will post a recording of this webinar today that's responding to your questions. Will, anything that you want to add before we move to the Q&A section?
No, I think that's great. Yeah, I think a lot will come out in the Q&A and then the Q&A document that'll follow when we're able to get more feedback, but that was helpful.
All right, thank you. So, so Tricia, please introduce yourself from our team and we'll jump into answering some questions here.
Of course. Hi, everyone. Thanks for joining us today. So I'm Tricia Levesque. I am the Chief of Staff here at Decolonizing Wealth Project and Liberated Capital. I will be facilitating the Q&A. So I see that there are 7 questions that have been up. So I'm going to go through and answer them. If you're upvoting, that's super helpful and helps us prioritize if it starts to get lengthy. I'll just answer a quick question. The PowerPoint being shared, Edgar just touched on that, but we are recording this session and that will be available. So that should be adequate, and the deck was quite short, but let us know if you have any other questions, of course. So we'll get started on the first question. Can organizations partner to submit a joint proposal?
Yeah, of course you all, we know that we build power, right? We organize through coalition, through networks. So we absolutely encourage that. Whatever makes sense for your community. I think my experience in movement building is that, networks and coalitions of groups are fantastic. So absolutely.
Great. And we've been asked about confusion and misconceptions about reparations. Are you looking at work to shift discourse and narratives that can support policy and advocacy change? And she's noting that if we don't tackle deservedness and anti-Blackness, how can this work take off? So anybody want to speak to that?
I'll start, and Will, if you want to chime in. I think that narrative changes I think for the purposes of this, we want to be very specific to narrative change that is connected to reparations, right? So I absolutely understand that the dominant, or pervasive narrative around anti-Blackness is a major barrier to reparations. But we do want to fund community organizing advocacy efforts that are tied to a specific fight around reparations versus a broad kind of mainstream narrative change campaign, I would imagine, but Will, feel free to add to that if you have thoughts.
Yeah, no, I agree. I think that's right. And in fact, I think the most effective local campaigns that we have seen in recent years that have been winning reforms around schools, around police, around reparations have all involved narrative change work in a very kind of localized way, in a way that speaks to people's hearts and minds. And so I think it's going to be baked into whatever you're probably thinking of doing. And to Edgar's point, this probably isn't something about like a narrative change only approach to the work, but narrative change is absolutely a part of any type of effective organizing, advocacy, campaigning strategy that will likely be impactful and winnable.
Next question is, are there parameters around the budget? Is staff time permissible?
No parameters. We are general operating support. Any funder that puts those kind of parameters on there is being an ineffective funder. All right. We are Liberated Capital every year. So this is money to do your work and however you need to do it. If it's for staff time, if it's for, a consultant, if it's to pay the lights, to pay organizers, whatever you need to spend this money on, we're not going to be asking for itemized detailed budget. This is just money to advance movement building. So none of those types of restrictions around line items. That's not how we do our work here.
All right. We're getting questions about contacting us. So again, info@decolonizingwealth.com is where you can reach us for specific questions about the RFP. And then I'm going to drop in the email address for Just Fund, and they're going to be your contact if you start having platform issues and you're submitting the RFP. So let me put that here in the chat. They're fantastic. So shoot them a message if you have any questions in your submission process. Anything
I was
else
just going to add, just to, for folks who may not be familiar, Just Fund is a platform where for nonprofits to apply for funding, and we're using their platform and software to receive all the proposals and to communicate through that platform. So you will probably see, if you submit email confirmations that will say Liberated Capital and Just Fund. And so that is us, and it is a new platform we're using. So please contact them if you have any technical issues around that. Great customer service, and I'll get right back to you. But again, we went with them because it's really easy and simple. I think there's like 6 questions on the application. And so we're not trying to make this a labor-intensive process for folks who are on the front line organizing for racial justice and reparations. So, but that's our partner in terms of the logistics of operationalizing this funding opportunity.
Indeed. Will there be a match requirement for the grant requests?
No match requirement for the grant request. And in fact, for us at Liberated Capital, for Decolonizing Wealth, we actually see that responsibility falling on us as folks who work in the field to elevate whatever projects, initiatives will be funded to our peers in philanthropy. And so in many ways, we're holding ourselves to a standard of leveraging to get more funding for this work.
We love it. What outcomes are we expecting?
I feel heavy hearing the questions, because I know these are typical questions that funders ask, and that we've all experienced some level of trauma applying for funding. You determine your outcomes. We ultimately want to see reparations happen, right? Like, we want to see a federal program. We want to see more folks take actions like Evanston, Illinois, like Asheville, North Carolina, we know that in 1 year time, we may not see that. Right. So we're interested to know specifically what your campaign is trying to accomplish. Is it a local campaign like that? Is it a campaign that's targeting an institution perhaps, right? And maybe it's not a city, but maybe it's a campaign, I'm just making this up. We've seen universities pay reparations, right, for Black students who are attending based off of, slaves who built these universities. So you tell us who you're targeting and what you're looking to accomplish. And, as much as you can get done in a year, but we don't expect that we'll see any of those major victories in a year, but it's possible, right? So you define your campaign, your targets, your outcomes, and just let us know so we don't have any prescribed outcomes that we're looking for on the front end.
Yeah, and I would just add, I think for us, we're more attuned to learning your vision, right? Like for us, it's not the outcomes are the outcomes, but what's really inspiring, what's going to lead to liberation is the vision. And so share that with us. The outcomes will follow.
And I will say the broader outcomes, kind of to Will's point, we are, from our end as Liberated Capital, as Decolonizing Wealth, we are going to use this opportunity to leverage more funding, right? We know that movement building work is grossly underfunded. Advocacy work is grossly underfunded, especially led by Black and Brown folks. And so this is an opportunity for us to start funding this movement. To my knowledge, no foundation has specifically funded reparations specific work in this type of way before. And so we're going to, an outcome for me is that we get more money for y'all to do this work. We will also, back to the communications question, that's a big part of what we do is help to elevate, at least within the space of philanthropy, but increasingly so outside of philanthropy, the narrative of truth and reconciliation and reparative giving and reparations. So we will work in partnership with you all over time to be able to have the stories to tell, to help amplify each other's work, to help create the political will in community, as well as like the philanthropic will within the sector to fund more of this work.
I have a question about the multi-year funding that you flagged at the beginning. Is that going to be announced when the initial award is released, or is that going to come later?
My practice is to be just as transparent and honest as possible with partners. At the point in time when we make funding decisions, and I probably should talk about that timeline a little bit. When we make those funding decisions, if I have secured multi-year funding at that point, and it's possible, we're in some very positive conversations with folks in our donor community right now, then we will make a multi-year commitment up front. If we don't have the resources, I don't want to promise what we don't have. But as soon as we have them, maybe it's 3 months into the project or 5 months, we will say, we're going to communicate that like, hey, you all, we have some more money to fund this work. So we're approaching this and going into this in the spirit of a long-term multi-year commitment. But we've got to build the case and support for that. And we're doing a pretty good job so far. I feel really positive about it, but we'll just communicate with folks around where we are. But we don't want to make a commitment up front, especially in writing if we don't have those dollars secured just yet. So we'll be honest and transparent about that as we get into the work.
Awesome. This is what I view as kind of like a follow-up to the joint proposal request. So there's a Black-led group that wants to work with Indigenous activists, and can organizations from 2 different cultures submit a proposal for repair for both cultures, or is that going to be too complicated?
It's not too complicated. This is our freedom is tied to yours, your freedom is tied to ours. So be as expansive, as visionary as you want to be. We are here to be in service of you. So yeah.
Fantastic. Now, can reparations be considered as education systems level change? I guess so, like the scope of what we're thinking.
Ed, what do you think?
Education systems level change. I probably need more information about that one. I'm not quite sure.
Let me follow up and I'll get you some more information, but let's move on from that one. Can we distinguish advocacy from lobbying? Because there seems to be a potential for overlap.
Absolutely. Will, do you want to take that? And then I can add on.
I mean, my inclination is yes, but you should say as the
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, so, you know, with philanthropic funding through the 501c3 vehicle, there are limitations around lobbying. We can actually fund lobbying, but we just have to have some limitations around that. It's easier for foundations to say no lobbying because it seems like extra work. And so lobbying is when you're taking the funds from you're using the funds to explicitly advocate for active legislation, right? So if there is a bill and you are making campaign contributions to folks to support a bill, or you are actively telling people in the community vote yes on this proposition or on this House bill or whatever. So in general, it's very flexible. Like I usually say, don't sweat it. You can definitely be lobbying. Folks can do lobbying work who are receiving these funds. Just say that you ask that you use other funds for the lobbying portion. It's just the safest way to go. But advocacy is all about educating people about specific legislation. You can do education work, right? Where the line is drawn is that you're not technically supposed to tell people how to vote on active legislation. But there's a website and a resource called Boulder Advocacy. .org that's from the Alliance for Justice that has some really good information around what is considered to be lobbying or not lobbying. I would not shy away from that in your work. If you mention that in your application, we're not gonna not fund you. We may have a conversation with you just to have clarity, but you know, I think that we are trying to change policy here. So there's advocacy is pretty broad in terms of what you can do, you know, with the work. It's really just kind of limiting that final step of telling people how they should vote is kind of where you draw the line, but it's a lot of flexibility in there. And these grants aren't significant enough that, you know, to get into the nuances of it really. So if there's active legislation and it's a part of your campaign, we can chat about it.
Perfect. We have a question about fiscal sponsorship. And how should organizations who work with a fiscal sponsor apply? Should the fiscal sponsor submit the proposal on behalf of the organization, or should the organization submit the proposal and then include all of the contact information for the fiscal sponsor?
In the proposal process, I think whoever's doing the work should submit it. Right. So in the proposal process, it asks you if you have a fiscal sponsor, if so, to share the contact information. And so award announcements would go to both you and your fiscal sponsors. So folks will be brought into that loop, right? So in terms of getting the payment to folks and all, but I think that, you know, you're more than welcome. Whoever's doing this work and knows the most about it should be the folks that are submitting the information, and we will make sure the check is getting to the right people.
We have two questions that I think are similar and they deal with scope. So one is, what about funding anti-racism work for youth of Black, brown, and white folks? And then the other question is about supporting a proposal for immigrants with disabilities. I think those both speak to things that might be a little bit outside of what we're looking for here, but interested in your comments.
Very important work, but a little broad. Everything we do at Liberated Capital is about anti-racism work and anti-oppression. So those programs seem very specific. We are looking And we will on this Google Doc add some examples of things that we're looking to fund because I understand that that's helpful. But we are looking for community groups, folks in communities, especially people of color, who are organizing a campaign specifically to see reparations policies enacted. So example that Will alluded to earlier, in New York, for example, they just passed legalized cannabis, right? So I was talking with someone this morning who is beginning to organize a campaign to push the city of New York to use that revenue from the cannabis tax or however they're making money off of it to fund to pay reparations to Black people who have been disproportionately impacted by the war on drugs, right? Folks who have served time and have not been able to get a job because of drug charges. So this is a direct act of repair where a community has been harmed, and then there's an opportunity to launch a campaign to pass a law or a policy to give money back to the folks who have been impacted. So when we're talking about reparations in general, we're talking about money, getting money back to the people. We're looking to close the race wealth gap. We're also often talking about land as a form of reparations. I don't want to limit it to those two things, but that's specifically kind of the kinds of reparations programs that are a priority for us.
A few questions about the reporting, and I know that you'd mentioned that we are, fluid in the sense of reporting and still filling that out, but folks want to know how rigorous is that reporting back and what specific requirements are there? And then also, are there start and end dates for qualifying expenses? And if so, what are they?
Yeah, let me start with timeline. So our timeline, the deadline for submission is June the 4th. And from there, we're giving ourselves, our committee, about a month to review the proposals. Now, this is, we're estimating how many proposals will come in, y'all, right? If we get like 5,000 proposals, we might need a little more time. We're a small organization, but we're assuming a certain amount. And giving ourselves time to get through those in a very respectful way. We really want to read what people submitted. So our goal is to get back to folks on the 1st of July to sort of announce the awards around that time. We will be wanting to engage with partners in a way that's very respectful. We're not trying to get in the way or create extra work for you. But we want to learn, and we are very experienced grant makers in terms of how to engage appropriately and respectfully with community. We will, follow you on social media and learn about your work that way. We will not ask you to meet with us constantly or to do reports throughout the year. We will be engaging with the partners at some level to understand how we can help you if there are ways to support this cohort of grantees with some, sharing of best practices or campaign, wins or ideas. We do want to help build the ecosystem at some level. So there's just, there'll be some minimum just conversations to kind of understand how we can be helpful. We will ask for some type of report at the end of the year, and it's simply, how are you doing? It's going to be the easiest report anybody has ever done, right? And maybe it's just a phone call. Maybe you don't have to fill out a piece of paper. We haven't decided all of that. But we typically don't ask our partners to do any type of report or evaluation for this specific RFP because we are looking to do something very specific together and to build momentum around campaigns at the local and regional level and national level. We are interested in kind of understanding where those campaigns are. And so we just want to learn from you in a way that is not going to be very labor intensive. When you see the application, you're going to be like, this is the easiest application I've ever filled out in my life. When it's time for us to connect and share our learnings, you're going to that's all designed to actually help build capacity and share learning across this ecosystem. It's not to be oppressive or to collect data or information that we will not use. So that's our position around that. And then timeline, sorry, to that question. So we plan to announce in July. So, you know, I think you all can specify probably in your application what if you have a timeline, but we imagine that, you know, we'll get checks to folks right away and they'll be ready to, you know, maybe the grant year starts August 1st and it's 12 months of funding. So that's kind of what we're looking at there. But we have lots of flexibility around that. We're not going to be auditing your finances. We're not going to be asking for, you know, 3 years of financial statements or 990s. We don't care. We want to fund authentic work in community led by people of color who are fighting for reparations. So that is what we hope to see you doing. And our plan is to support you, get money to you and to support you in other ways that make sense without creating extra hoops and paperwork for you to have to attend to.
Yeah. And I just want to name, because it keeps coming up, in the questions themselves, but then also even in some of the kind of responses, we are committed to challenging, bucking up against the harmful dynamics in philanthropy that we have so typically and traditionally operated within. This process for us, even as we're building it as a new process, is our own work and our own effort to undo a lot of those harmful dynamics. And so when it comes to thinking about how you structure your proposal and stuff, again, my recommendation is think about the vision of what you want to build. Like, what is the vision that is pushing you? What is the mission that is pushing you to do this work and why? That's what we want to hear. When it comes to reporting out, the conversation is also like, what does it look like to win? And what has that meant for you? And what hasn't worked, right? So again, completely in service of you and what you should be thinking about, what you want to be thinking about in terms of the work is what we want to hear. There's no expectation of a checklist of things that we will be expecting to hear from you or responses that need to fit into some sort of confinement around whether or not this work is deemed necessary or important. It's all necessary and important. So just wanted to say that.
Next two questions deal a lot with what kind of capacity support we're bringing. And so we mentioned that we'd want to be, you know, kind of a connected amplifying platform for this work. So what kind of capacity support will Decolonizing Wealth Project be offering? And then to that end, from the funder perspective, are we looking for just monetary donations at this time? Or are we asking donors and supporters for other types of support?
Interesting question. In terms of the type of support we want to offer, primarily it is money. That is, we move money through Liberated Capital. So that's what we're going to be looking to focus on, is getting more money to the ecosystem for years to come. I think beyond money, we have a significant platform to lend to this movement, to amplify your work, to do storytelling, to help shift the narrative, to help contribute to this building of the public will for reparations locally and nationally. And so in whatever ways make sense for us to amplify efforts and to do storytelling, that I know sometimes when you're on the front lines doing work, you don't have time to do a lot of comms around that. So that's something that we're really interested in supporting, and we do that quite well. I know in my years of funding movement building work, folks have really appreciated the work around comms, communications, and so that's something that we want to offer. And we don't have very specific ideas around that right now, because we really want our partners, you all, to drive that. We are not a funder who is going to create all types of performative types of support for grantees. I've been at places and worked at places that did that, right? So, but we will talk with you all around what is helpful. Is it helpful to have a convening? Is it helpful to all meet up and come together? Is it helpful to have a series of webinars? Is it helpful to connect you all to some legal counsel for, around campaigns? I think connecting of the dots and helping to build relationships across the ecosystem is something that will be a very natural thing for us to do. So we have no, on the front end, not a lot of, concrete ideas around what support will look like beyond money, because we want to engage you all and ask you about what would be helpful as we get into this work. We know that you're already busy. You're going to be very busy doing this work. You're probably already doing this work. And so we don't want to create more things for you to do unless it's something that is, really beneficial to helping to accelerate movement toward your wins in these campaigns and to building power in Black and Brown communities. So that is something that we'll be really listening for and talking with the ecosystem around while we're funding individual campaigns. Is there work that we could be doing to help build the field and the ecosystem of movement work and advocacy work towards reparations? Will, anything you want to add to that?
Oh, perfect.
All right, great.
Can a foundation launching efforts to initiate reparations through a donor advised fund apply for this and then re-grant out to Black-led organizations? This is specific to, like, if this person's foundation doesn't have a Black CEO and all the staff leading this work are Black and all grant recipients would be Black. So kind of two parts. Can we do like the re-granting, and then also how are we viewing a situation when maybe it's not necessarily Black-led at the, or Indigenous-led at the executive level?
Yeah, well, to the first point, we would invite you to give to Liberated Capital. That's literally what we are. We are a community of donors. We use a donor advised fund model. Most of our donors are probably white, people with wealth, who give the money to our fund, and then we re-grant those dollars to Black and Brown communities. So it's Black and Brown people, Indigenous, making the decisions about who to fund in those communities. So we would not fund a white-led donor advised fund to do what we're already doing here. But we would absolutely welcome your support to increase this pool of funding to the partners doing this work. So we would welcome you to our community of 300 donors. So email us at info@decolonizingwealth.com. Happy to set up a call with you and give you more specifics about what it means to be in this donor community. So would love and welcome your support there. And then the latter part of the question, do you remember what it was? Well, I forgot already. Or remind me, Tricia.
Yeah, so this person, it was a CEO who was a white male, but the people leading this work would be Black-led. So is that a disqualifying factor? And that's also a follow-up to somebody else's question, which is, white male in an executive director role, but having a BIPOC group and core team working along with them. How does that factor into our decision making?
Sure. We really value and prioritize BIPOC leadership, and we're not going to get technical about it in that way, but we will. There is a question, I believe, in the application that's very specific to how are you accountable to these two communities of color, right? And so, there may be a situation where it's a mostly BIPOC board and a mostly BIPOC leadership team in an organization, but a white person is the ED. We're not going to necessarily reject that application. I define majority, I define people of color led organization by having either majority people of color board and or leadership team. So I think that in that case, if I were looking at it, I would go right to your website and look at your board and see what things look like there. And, but yeah, we're not super specific around that. We trust that you all know what it means to be an organization that's led by people of color, and also that is also accountable to communities of color, right? That's a important factor, right? Diversity matters, but also accountability to the communities that you're serving matter. And we do ask about that question. Will, do you anything you want to add to that?
Perfect.
Okay.
I know that we're coming up on time, so I'm going to start skipping around to questions that I feel like haven't been directly responded to in some way. Is there a max grant amount for the request?
So I think
There's,
we're
you know, we haven't, oh, go ahead. Go
no,
ahead.
no,
Go ahead. You know, we have sort of put in this frequently asked questions document that we imagine a range between 25 to 75. That's dependent on the availability of resources, of course, right? And what all comes in. So the average awards will probably be around 50. And I think that, you know, the grants that fall on the larger end will probably be grants who have more significant budgets around their campaigns and are doing work that translates to you know, a larger scale of impact, right? So there's no limitations there, but that's just sort of what we're encouraging you to ask for only what you need. We want to stretch these dollars out to as many groups as possible. We don't want to underfund work, but really, you know, ask for what you need. But that's, we're estimating at this point that they will range from 25 to 75 is best guess.
Awesome.
Will, you want to add to that?
Oh.
well, just the reiteration that we have a commitment to leveraging those grant dollars on our end as well. So if you're a group that receives $50,000, we are going to be out there across the field of philanthropy talking about your work and what's happening so that we can leverage more funding to that work as well.
Absolutely.
Yes. And this is, I feel, related. There's a question about whether or not a smaller grassroots group would consider partnering with a larger, better resource or better established institution to submit an application. And what I'm hearing is that we really encourage any organization at whatever level that you're at to submit, and that we would review accordingly. But do you two want to speak to that?
Absolutely. Only partner if it makes sense for your work. You don't have to partner with a larger organization that you feel like may have more credibility or a larger budget just to get funded. If you are already in partnership with a larger organization and that partnership is helping you win and build power and to accelerate your campaign, then by all means, you know, partner. But there's no, we have no limitations around budget size and all of that. You know, we are wanting folks to demonstrate capacity around understanding this work and around being engaged in community and understanding movement building, right? So we're not going to find a startup that's like, oh, here's the first grant, let me start doing reparations to get this money to do this work, right? Like that type of work is kind of like obvious. We're really looking to support folks who are, you know, either already actively or just about to start doing work around reparations that would that these resources would really make a difference for. So no need to just be yourself and be honest. Will said, tell us your vision, and then speak to an understanding that you play to, and what are you trying to win? You know, or the what is the campaign? What are you trying to change? Who are you trying to get? Right. So so yeah, just be yourself. Will?
Nope, that's it. I know we're at time. Ed, you were breaking up a little bit, so people might have missed that last sentence, but I know we're also at time. So.
Yeah, absolutely. So sorry that I chopped out a little bit there. So just a reminder, the request for proposals is at decolonizingwealth.com/reparations. Any other questions that you have at all, please email us. It's the best way to get in touch, info@decolonizingwealth.com. And we will be populating questions and answers that come in through email on this Google Doc that everyone can see the responses to. So we're committed to responding to all email questions and sharing the questions and answers publicly in this Google Doc that come up along the way. And we're so thankful that you all joined us today and that you're in this struggle with us. It's the time for reparations is now, and we want to be supportive to this movement to see our people get what is due, what is owed to us. Any closing words from the team?
The freedom.
Yes.
Let's go.
Freedom,
Yes.
to healing, to freedom.
Absolutely. And again, if you didn't hear your question or answered in some way or form, we do have the Q&A open, and we'll be making sure to slot those into that Google Doc, and I'll repost that link right now so that you can have that up and ready. So keep checking throughout today and tomorrow just to see if your questions have been responded to. That's all.
All right. Thank you, Trisha. Thanks, everyone. Look forward
Thanks all.
to hearing from you.
Bye.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye.